We're in the middle of a global and national emergency, a pandemic, the likes of which none of us
For a 2-week period until Easter Sunday, April 12th. Everybody must stay at home.
Our children are without schools and colleges. Our sports stadiums lie empty. Our concert halls are silent.
In March 2020, COVID-19 hit the world in a pandemic like no other in living memory.
The Taoiseach Leo Varadkar said the progress being made is not enough.
The recent surge in COVID-19 infections and what the
It is increasingly clear that we are experiencing another surge of COVID.
3 years later, when the world has moved on,
Public health measures that we have had to live with will be removed.
a new, hidden pandemic is slowly rearing its head.
A new survey of 988 people with long COVID found almost 90% of them have not yet returned to their pre-COVID level.
In September 2022, the World Health Organization announced that an estimated 145 million people around the world are suffering from long COVID.
A quarter of patients attending the long COVID follow-up clinic here at the Mater Hospital say they still have symptoms.
It pervades every aspect of your life. It limits your life. It's effectively a disability.
Long COVID, the silent struggle, an illness so unknown to us. How is it affecting those suffering, the people who love them, and those who care for them? These are their stories. When did you first test positive for COVID?
In November, November 2021.
Anne-Marie, a wife and mother from Dublin, has spent her whole life working as a nurse and an acupuncturist. Anne-Marie caught a virus in 2011 that left her with a chronic respiratory condition that affects her whole life. When COVID-19 hit in 2020, it was her worst nightmare.
My consultant told me if I got COVID that he'd retire and leave the country. He was... But yeah, I was very, very frightened, actually, when I got COVID. But I knew straight away, when I came down with the symptoms, I knew what it was.
Due to Anne-Marie's existing illness, having COVID was life-threatening and world-shaking. Unfortunately, this was only the beginning of her journey.
So yeah, when I saw the positive result, I knew I was kind of in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I was very scared at the prospect of potentially going into hospital.
Yeah.
Because having worked in hospital myself, I knew there was a huge infection risk once I went into hospital. And I had known several people who went into hospital and didn't come out. And these would have been people who were previously healthy.
Mm-hmm.
So not even people who were as vulnerable as I was.
Mm-hmm.
We knew that if she got COVID, that it could be very, very serious for her. Because she would have been in the group of people that would have got very seriously ill with COVID.
It's at this point in the story I should probably tell you why I'm sharing this story with you. Anne-Marie and her husband Niall, the two people you've heard from, are my parents.
Friends and family were amazing. My children were amazing. And I knew they were very scared because they had seen me really ill with respiratory illnesses before, and this was for a lot of people who got COVID, it was some imaginary effect that it might have. It was, they were listening to what was going on television, what other people were saying, but for my children, they had seen and had really true experience what it was like to see somebody so ill.
Yeah.
With a respiratory infection. So it was a little bit too real, a little bit too close to the bone.
Mm-hmm.
It was very hard for me to be okay with any of that, to be quite honest with you.
I was 11 when my mum first got sick, and we've been living with this for as long as I can remember. Having grown up watching my mum suffer with her illness, and then COVID, and then long COVID, which you'll hear about in a few minutes, it is very important to us as a family that we share Anne-Marie's story so that others who might be in the same situation feel like they're not alone.
We both had COVID, but I had to drive her to hospital and literally drop her there because obviously I couldn't go in. And I had to hand her over to the care of other people.
I said goodbye to him in the car park, and I honestly didn't want to think about the fact that I was saying goodbye to him, and I'd said goodbye to my family before I left the house, because I really wasn't sure what was going to happen from then on.
Being in hospital in the COVID intensive care unit was deemed more dangerous than trying to recover from home. For years, my mum coming home from hospital was something that was seen as a good thing. But this time, in this circumstance, when your mother is too sick to be in hospital for fear that she wouldn't come home if she stayed, you can understand why we wouldn't be too happy. Because of Anne-Marie's medical professional background, she was sent home from the hospital on the same day to continue her own care at home.
Alrighty. When did you get your long COVID diagnosis? How was that for you?
So I was going back and forward to my consultant after I'd had COVID because I needed close monitoring. And it was a couple of days before Christmas, which would have been about 6 weeks after I had COVID, that my consultant first mentioned to me that my symptoms didn't seem to be settling down the way other people's had, and that she would need to keep an eye on the situation for long COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So I then returned to her a couple of times in January. I had lots of blood tests done and other monitoring, heart monitoring and stuff, to make sure there wasn't anything else tying into causing some of the symptoms that I was experiencing. By about the February, she said no, definitely that it was looking like long COVID, and she spoke to a couple of her consultant colleagues who were dealing with long COVID about me, and they said yes, definitely that it looked like long COVID. So I was then referred to a long COVID clinic. So he then said, yeah, you've got long COVID, and yes, all these things are as a result of COVID, but we actually haven't got very much to offer.
At the time of her diagnosis, long COVID wasn't something that was very well known to the public. Doctors and medical professionals themselves were still learning how to deal with it. There was nothing to compare it to, no long history of the illness, and we're still learning new things every day.
They didn't really have anything to offer with regard to the taste and smell symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And the main thing that he offered was to refer me to the physiotherapy department for long COVID rehabilitation. So I received an appointment from them, and I went along to meet the physiotherapist who was specialising in that area, and she was absolutely brilliant.
To learn more about living with long COVID, I went to Connolly Hospital to speak with my mum's long COVID physio, Arrah, who worked alongside patients who'd been diagnosed with long COVID. As I was meeting Arrah at the hospital, we had our conversations outside, as at the time masks were still mandatory in medical buildings.
So it was very eye-opening in the beginning, because I took over the job at the start of 2022, and that was March of 2022 when everything started to open up again. People could go out to restaurants, like pubs were open again, and there weren't many restrictions. So everyone had started to begin to move on, but then I started this job where I could see the people who wanted to move on, but they couldn't move on. had a patient as young as 25 to a patient as old as in their 80s. But those who were severely affected were actually the ones who were in their 50s and in their 60s. And you can imagine these are people who have young families, people who have mortgages to pay, people who can't afford not to work. So on the outside, the people in the long COVID clinic looked normal. They looked like they could function as a normal human. But if you asked them to walk from, say, one table to the table beside it, or if you asked them to go up a flight of stairs, then they would be breathless and gasping. And you'd compare it to a normal person doing a 5K run.
I literally just walked up to the stairs a moment ago and I'm completely puffed. Nearly too puffed to actually get into the bed that I came up to take a rest in.
She got me to fill out lots of questionnaires and then chatted to me about them afterwards. And for the first time, with the long COVID and my ongoing respiratory condition, I felt like somebody was actually speaking the same language as me.
What I found working in the clinic was that it was the first time someone had took the time to sit down and listen, because people didn't believe them, basically, because they looked normal, as I said, on the outside, but their symptoms were very much real. So it was quite eye-opening from that setting. It is a long-term, like a chronic illness, so anything like diabetes, or if you're living after a stroke, or if you have high blood pressure, it's kind of those things. Long COVID is a condition associated like those. It's a chronic condition.
At the risk of using a overly used word, I really felt validated for the first time in a very, very long time. This person is actually asking me questions and is not looking at me like I have 10 heads when I give a response. It's like, oh yeah, I understand that's what's going on. And then to say, and actually I had somebody else in your age the other day who was feeling the exact same way or was having the exact same symptoms.
To be able to say to somebody, I feel tired, but I don't know why. And for them to give her a perfectly valid reason, a perfectly valid explanation that fitted with the set of circumstances. To actually discover that and then to discover the mechanisms to cope with it.
Yeah.
Was really, really important.
During conversations with my mum, dad and Arrah, learning to live with long COVID is one of the key things they all spoke about.
Yes, there's a lot about pacing in a society where it's kind of glorified to keep working hard, keep going. Like, say in the gym, if you don't work hard enough, you don't push yourself, you're not going to get anything out of it. I was telling my patients the complete opposite. Because if they push themselves, they're literally going to run out of battery, use up their reserved battery, and completely be wrecked for a longer time.
The biggest thing I would say is that you have to plan. I just have to sometimes think about how I approach this now, rather than just being able to say, oh yeah, okay, well I'll just move this to here and that to there and it'll be fine. I have to think about the knock-on effect all of the time now. And you might say, oh well, everybody does that, but not to the same forensic level as this.
Before this, we would have always shared the things that needed to be done. We share them between us. Whether it's dropping the kids wherever they needed to be, or doing the grocery shopping, or cleaning the house, or whatever needed to be done. They're just the normal day-to-day routine things.
My mum and dad have always worked hard to make sure they share their jobs equally. For example, spending time doing the gardening or painting and decorating around the house have always been something they enjoyed working on together. I have very vivid memories of them spending the entire day replanting the garden until it was cold and dark outside, watching both of them share ideas and plan the whole thing.
dealing with long COVID, she's had to make sure she paces herself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she can do a certain thing for a small amount of time, but she always has to be very, very conscious of not expending all her energy.
Mm-hmm.
Because if she does that, then it just leaves her feeling completely wiped out for several days afterwards. Or it might be even 2 days later that it actually hits her. You know, what that's meant for me is that I do end up doing more of those things, which is obviously more work for me, but it also means that, you know, as a couple, there were lots of things that we enjoyed doing together. And we haven't been able to do those as fully as we would have in the past.
But apparently this is a actual recognised syndrome now, called PESE.
Okay.
And literally when she handed me the sheet that described PESE, I read it and it was like I was reading about myself.
PESE, or post-exertional symptom exacerbation, is triggered by physical, mental and social exertions, and symptoms include exhaustion, brain fog and physical pain.
It's all about symptom management, which is hard because it's hard telling people every day that, you know, there's no cure for this. Every day will be different. You will have bad days and the good days, and the important thing was just to pace, which is really hard for this group of people.
I know if I work a really long day on Tuesday, have to do something on Tuesday evening, then had to get up on Wednesday morning, by Wednesday evening or Thursday, I am going to be dead on my feet, completely wiped out, and potentially wipe out the rest of the week.
Yeah.
And to have to then, which totally goes against the grain for me, turn around and say to somebody, actually, you know what, I'm not actually going to be able to meet you that evening.
Mm-hmm.
Or worse against worse, not go to choir. I really have to prioritise what I'm doing, prioritise me, try and make myself number one, which is very hard.
Yeah.
And my family and the dog and the cats.
Hiya, how are you? How are you? I'm alright. That's your mind. I know.
While talking with my parents about living with long COVID, my mum talked about joining the SUSO Gospel Choir during COVID. She attends every week, and the impact it has had on her life is beyond imaginable.
You know, from an emotional support, I suppose, is just to make sure that I make a conscious effort to get out and meet my friends, to, you know, make an appointment to go for a coffee with somebody, to have a bit of lunch somewhere, to meet my parents, go out with my husband, and of course to go to choir, which I absolutely love. But come Wednesday evening, which is choir evening, sometimes if you've had a few things on during the day, I could be sitting there thinking, oh, you know, I could just do it sitting on the sofa. But I know from experience that once I get my choir bag ready, I get out, get into the car, get on the road, once I get there and get into that choir space, the energy just changes.
To get to know more about how the choir impacts lives, I spoke with Eimear, SUSO Music School's director, and attended the gospel choir's rehearsals and gigs.
Do you think the choir has had lasting impact on lives? You know?
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. It's insane, the connections, the friendships, the experiences. The gospel choir have been together now coming up to 9 years in September, and they've had an awful lot of incredible experiences, and you know, they're just growing together all the time, and like you sing with people and you have these experiences with people, you just get to know people on a level that, you know, you don't get to know most people.
It's just such an amazing space to be in, and it's not that if you're having a tough time or have had a tough day, whatever, it's not that people go, oh great, yo, jolly jolly. They listen. They do listen. The people are there, you know, to support each other. But the positive, caring energy that's there, it's just like nothing I've experienced anywhere else. We have such a laugh. As an adult, I have never laughed so much as I do when we're in choir.
Yeah.
Because there's always something. There's always somebody gaffs up, or somebody, you know, passes a funny comment or whatever it is. But it's such a genuine laughter.
The joy that you'd see on her face coming out of the choir sessions, it was wonderful to see, because she just enjoyed it all so much, and just being able to express herself, and, you know, to release the energy and emotion and everything else that comes from singing, and to be with people who enjoy the same thing. And, you know, that was really important for her mental and emotional well-being.
Bessel van der Kolk did a massive study. He wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and he's a trauma expert, and looking at kind of trauma in people and where trauma is stored in the body and what are the things that help it. And he's studied thousands of cases, like for all races, religions, ages, stages, and there's a couple of common things that move trauma through the body and help people to get over things that happen to you. And like singing is one of them, and community and groups is one of them.
I'm going to give you a quote from the book that Eimear has mentioned. Being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. I'm sure you can tell how much that this relates to my mum's story.
I hope you enjoyed this. This is a song called Scars, and it's dedicated to anybody who's ever been through anything ever. It's been long, yes, it's been hard.
But I remember coming home from the first actual night that we were physically at choir, and all the family in the kitchen, and everybody said that I was buzzing.
Yeah. You were jumping around the place, like almost literally.
Just
bouncing off the walls.
I don't know, it was an energy that I hadn't felt for such a long time. And not anything to do with the people who were around me or anything, but it's just an energy that couldn't be created by anything else.
Yeah.
The World Health Organization declared on the 6th of May 2023 that the COVID-19 pandemic was officially over. After 3 years, when the world has moved on, people like Anne-Marie are still left living with the long-term effects. There are almost 250,000 people living with long COVID in Ireland alone. We hope that if you are listening to this story, that it helps you understand the effects of long COVID. And we also hope that if you are suffering or caring for somebody who is suffering, that you feel less alone.
I suppose one of the big things is that it's been a hard enough thing to get through. But my family have been so amazing and so understanding, and I know it's taught them different life lessons themselves, and how they handle themselves and how they understand what other people are going through in their lives around them, which is good. But for me, I know I work in a medical profession. I know that families and husbands and children are not always understanding. when it comes to somebody being ill in the house, and particularly when it's long term. But I am truly blessed to have an amazing family around me. And I am in no doubt that I would not have got this far without them. And I love them very much.
We love you too.